Hey there, welcome in. I'm really glad you're here with me today. I hope you're settled somewhere cozy, maybe with a warm drink, a soft blanket, or just a quiet moment to yourself, because we're about to dive into another story together. Before we begin, check in with me down in the comments. Tell me how your day's been going and let me know where you're watching from. I always love hearing from you. Alright, let's get into it. There are nights in life when the world feels like it's speeding up and you're the only thing standing still. For Aisha, it was a Tuesday night, the kind of night that should have been quiet, tucked away safely between Monday madness and Wednesday worries. Aisha was a woman carved out of necessity and love. At 32, she carried the easy grace of someone who spent more time lifting a toddler than weights. But her eyes, deep brown and usually sparkling with quick humor, were currently wide with a fear that tasted metallic. She had the look of a single parent everywhere, tired yet sharp, wearing clothes that were practical before they were fashionable but always neat. Tonight, it was a simple, well-worn denim jacket and dark jeans, the kind of outfit that let her blend into the late-night Toronto bustle. She had her handbag clutched so tightly against her chest it was a part of her now, a leather shield. The problem wasn't the purse. The problem was the feeling, that distinct, chilling instinct that someone wasn't just walking behind you, they were watching you. And they were getting closer. The setting was the Anchor, a popular spot downtown, the kind of place that served incredible comfort food, think savory jerk chicken and rich macaroni pie, but stayed open late enough to catch the city's after-hours crowd. It wasn't fancy, but it was known for being dependable, and tonight Aisha needed dependable like she needed air. She burst through the heavy glass door, not quite running, but moving with a hurried, silent urgency that made the bell above the door jingle like an alarm. She didn't look left or right. Her gaze was frantic, sweeping the room for one thing only: a hiding spot. The restaurant was mostly empty now, dimly lit and smelling pleasantly of spice and roasted garlic. A few tables were occupied by couples finishing their dates or old friends nursing coffee, but tucked into the back corner, near the brick wall, was a large booth that dominated the space. And it was there that Aisha's eyes landed. Sitting in that booth was a man who looked like he belonged on a movie poster, but the kind where the hero might actually be the bad guy. This was Elias. He was big, not just tall but broad, filling out his expensive dark charcoal suit like it was molded to him. His hair was meticulously kept, cut tight on the sides, and his hands, resting on the dark wooden table, were large and still. Elias was 40, and every year seemed to have carved something crucial into his face, leaving behind a sharp jawline and eyes the color of dark honey, which usually held a cold, assessing distance. He was known in certain circles. Circles Aisha had zero business knowing about, as a person of significant influence, someone whose quiet presence spoke louder than a stadium full of shouting. He was dangerous looking not because he was aggressive but because he was utterly, unnervingly calm. He wasn't alone. Two other men, hulking and silent, occupied the rest of the booth, acting more like furniture than company, occasionally glancing up and then returning to the quiet, vigilant study of the restaurant entrance. These were Elias's men, and they knew the rule. When Elias was thinking, everyone was silent. Aisha saw the booth, she saw the three men, and she saw the one empty seat directly across from Elias. It was the only empty chair in the entire back half of the restaurant. Desperation doesn't leave room for options. It only leaves room for action. She walked straight over, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she worried it might be audible. She stopped directly in front of the table, her shadow falling across the perfectly set glass of ice water in front of Elias. Elias's eyes lifted slowly, meeting hers. There was no warmth, no flicker of interest, just a deep, cold study. The two men beside him shifted almost imperceptibly, their attention instantly piqued by this small, hurried woman interrupting the boss. Aisha cleared her throat, her voice barely a breath. "Excuse me," she whispered, her gaze sweeping past Elias's shoulder toward the street just visible through the window. "I'm so sorry, but—" She forced herself to look at him, her lips pressed into a thin line of pleading. She leaned in just a little, keeping her voice low, a request that was half prayer, half desperate gamble. "Can I sit here?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. The background sounds of the restaurant, the faint clatter of cutlery, a laugh from a distant table, seemed to die away. Elias didn't move. He simply stared, taking in the panic barely concealed behind her polite mask, the slight tremble in her hands. He wasn't used to people asking him for favors, especially not a small, ordinary woman with terrified eyes. His expression remained utterly unreadable. His men watched, waiting for the inevitable signal to dismiss her, maybe even escort her out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity that stretched Aisha's nerves to breaking point, he gave a minuscule nod, the faintest acknowledgement of her existence. His voice, when it came, was a low, smooth rumble, utterly devoid of emotion, like gravel rolling across silk. "Sit," he said. He watched her slide quickly into the seat, placing her purse in her lap as if it contained the secret to her survival. "But," he added, his dark eyes hardening slightly as they fixed on hers, the tension between them snapping like a tight wire, "don't expect to leave." The statement hung in the air, a cold, hard promise. Aisha felt a fresh wave of panic, but she forced herself to breathe, realizing that being near him, dangerous or not, was the only barrier she had between herself and the threat outside. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had run from one danger straight into the lap of another. Aisha simply nodded, her hand gripping the fabric of her coat. She didn't speak, didn't order anything, didn't even look at the menu. She just sat, breathing shallowly, desperately trying to appear like a normal person having a perfectly normal dinner with a group of very intimidating strangers. Elias's men exchanged a quick, confused glance. They knew his rules. No one sat at the table unless invited, and no interruption went unpunished. Yet here she was, not just sitting but being allowed to sit, all on her own desperate request. The curiosity in the booth was palpable. Aisha watched the entrance through the reflection on the window, her breath catching as a tall, shadowy figure paused just outside, looking in. She didn't know how long she would have to stay or what his chilling demand truly meant, but in that moment, the safety of the heavy restaurant door and the sheer, intimidating presence of Elias was the only comfort she had. She was terrified, yes, but she was safe, at least for now. She took a slow, deep breath, finally letting the tension ease out of her shoulders, replacing the fear with a steel-hard determination. She wasn't just a scared woman. She was a mother, and sometimes a mother's fear turns into the fiercest kind of strength. Aisha sat perfectly still, the rough texture of the booth's vinyl pressing against her back, trying to project an air of normalcy that was miles away from the panic churning inside her. Elias, the man across the table, hadn't moved much either. He simply studied her with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like a detailed inventory. His two men, sitting silently on either side of the booth, seemed to be holding their breath. This wasn't how business meetings usually went, and their boss's quiet, watchful demeanor was contagious. "Something to drink?" Elias asked, his voice still low, but now carrying a faint edge of formal politeness. The kind you use when you want something and are willing to wait for it. Aisha shook her head quickly, then remembered to soften the motion. "Oh no, thank you," she whispered. I just needed to rest for a moment." She deliberately kept her focus on her water glass, avoiding eye contact as much as possible, fearful that the truth was written too plainly on her face. Elias leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked like a masterpiece of expensive tailoring. "This isn't a bus stop," he observed, his tone flat. "People don't just rest at my table, especially not late at night." The tension ratcheted up again. This was the interrogation wrapped in casual conversation. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to figure her out, searching for the crack in her story. "I know," Aisha said, keeping her voice even. "I apologize. It was rude. I had a long day. Really long. I'm waiting for a cab," she lied smoothly, the words slipping out almost automatically. "A cab," Elias repeated, a hint of something, maybe skepticism, maybe mild amusement, touching the corners of his mouth. "And you needed to wait for that cab directly across from three strangers? In the darkest corner of the restaurant." He paused, letting his question settle. "Tell me your name." "Aisha," she said, giving him the truth because in this situation, a false name might trigger a whole new level of trouble. "Aisha Johnson." Elias nodded slowly. "Elias Thorne. Now Miss Johnson. People don't sit down at my table unless they know me," he said, the emphasis on my, making the ownership of the space undeniable. "And the people who know me usually know exactly why they're sitting here. So let's start over. Who sent you?" Aisha felt a rush of cold realization. He didn't think she was just a scared woman. He thought she was an operative. He was convinced this was a setup, a distraction, or a poorly executed move by a rival. This was a nightmare of mistaken identity, but she couldn't afford to laugh. "No one sent me, Mr. Thorne. I promise," she insisted, her voice tight with sincerity. "I don't know who you are. I don't know anyone connected to you. I saw the empty seat and I ran for it. That's all." Elias didn't blink. He just stared at the entrance of the restaurant, then back at her. Ran from what, Aisha? She hesitated. Telling him she was running from her deranged ex-boyfriend, a man who had been stalking her since she left him in Kingston, felt too mundane, too domestic for this dramatic setting. It also felt dangerously revealing. She needed to be generic. "Someone was following me," she admitted, letting her fear color her voice. "Since I left the clinic. I thought if I went somewhere busy they would." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the windows. Elias's gaze didn't soften. "The clinic," he mused, leaning forward slightly. "What kind of clinic? Maybe someone thought you saw something you shouldn't have." He was probing, looking for the angle that connected her to his world of hidden transactions and shadowy threats. "A dental clinic," Aisha clarified, a small, genuine smile flickering on her face, born from the absurdity of the situation. "I had a root canal this morning. I'm afraid that's the most dramatic thing that's happened to me all week." His lip twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. He was assessing her story, measuring the truth in the mundane details. A root canal. It was too silly to be a lie. Just as he seemed ready to press further, a sudden movement outside the restaurant caught Aisha's eye. The tall, shadowy figure from before, the one she recognized as Mark's friend, was walking slowly past, his face obscured by the streetlights, but his profile unmistakable. He was looking in, searching every face. Aisha's breath hitched. She instinctively dropped her head, reaching down to subtly pull her denim collar higher, praying that the shadow didn't spot her familiar jacket. Her hands, resting on the table, started to tremble uncontrollably, a fine, nervous shaking that gave away everything she was trying to hide. She pulled her handbag closer, feeling the distinct vibration against her thigh. It was her phone. She knew with a sinking feeling of dread who it was. She hesitated, knowing the sound would break the tense silence. Elias saw the whole sequence. He saw the shift in her eyes as she spotted the person outside, the sudden violent tremor of her hands, and the way her entire body tensed when her bag vibrated. He didn't miss a thing. Aisha knew she had to check the message. Maybe it was her sitter, maybe it was an emergency. She fumbled with the zipper, her fingers clumsy with fear, and pulled out her phone, holding it low beneath the table's edge. The screen lit up. The message was from Mark, her ex. It wasn't a question or an apology. It was pure poison, laced with a threat that made the color drain from her face. "You can run, but you can't hide. Tell me where you are now, or I'll go to the school tomorrow morning. You know I will." The words hit her like a punch, instantly changing her fear for herself into a paralyzing terror for her little girl, Leah. The trembling in her hands intensified, running up her arms and into her shoulders. She quickly powered the phone off, shoving it back into her bag as if the screen itself could betray her. Elias had been watching her eyes. He didn't need to see the phone screen. He saw the rapid, devastating change in her expression. The realization of a threat far more intimate and devastating than any business deal gone sour. He saw the deep, undeniable fear of a mother. "You're not afraid of me, are you, Aisha?" Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his cold eyes suddenly sharpened with genuine interest. "You're terrified of whatever sent that text. And you're trembling for someone else, not yourself." Aisha didn't answer. She just looked down at the table, clutching her purse, unable to speak, knowing that in the space of 30 seconds, this dangerous stranger had seen right through her layers of lies and discovered the core of her vulnerability, her child. Elias sat back again, his expression softening slightly, not into kindness but into a calculation of a different sort. He was still convinced she was connected to something, but perhaps not the kind of connection he first suspected. He realized she was just a civilian, running from a monster who used love as a weapon, and she had stumbled into his fortress seeking refuge. Suddenly, the cold tension in the booth started to shift. Elias looked at his men, a quiet, almost imperceptible signal passing between them, a change in command. He wasn't looking for a rival anymore. He was looking for a problem to be solved. "Tell me about him," Elias said softly, leaning his massive frame forward, offering an unexpected lifeline in the silent, intimidating warmth of the booth. "Who is Mark and what is he going to do to your daughter?" Aisha slowly looked up, her eyes glistening. For the first time since she entered the restaurant, she saw not a threat, but a strange, terrifying chance. She was shaking, but there was a flicker of hope. She had walked in fearing the world outside, and now she was about to put all her trust in the man who told her not to expect to leave. The moment Elias asked about Mark and her daughter, Aisha felt the precarious dam of her composure shatter. The restaurant, the intimidating men, the expensive suit, it all faded away, leaving only the sharp, blinding reality of Leah's danger. She needed to tell him everything, but the ingrained habit of fear was screaming at her to run. She pushed back from the table, a jerky, desperate movement that scraped the legs of the chair loudly against the tiled floor. "I need to go," she whispered, already scrambling to stand up. "I can't be here. He knows I left, he knows I'm trying to hide. If I'm not home, he'll find a way to hurt her." Elias's hand shot out, not touching her, but slamming flat onto the table right where her chair had been, the sudden, sharp sound freezing her mid-lunge. "Sit down, Aisha," he commanded, his voice suddenly sharp and low, the velvet tone gone. "Running won't help you now. It just tells the person outside exactly where you are and that you're alone." Aisha froze, her heart thumping against the threat in his voice. She was trapped by the man outside and trapped by the man across the table. But before either of them could utter another word, a new, completely unexpected sound cut through the heavy silence. A joyful, high-pitched giggle. "Mommy!" Everyone turned. The front door of the Anchor had opened, and standing there, framed by the cold night air, was a tiny, brightly dressed explosion of energy. It was Leah, Aisha's 4-year-old daughter. Leah looked like a miniature version of Aisha, all bright eyes and curly, untamed hair, currently bundled into a fluffy pink jacket. She was running toward their table with the single-minded focus of a heat-seeking missile tracking its target. Behind her, scrambling and looking sheepish, was Aisha's friend and sitter, Trina, who was clearly trying to grab the child's coat. "I told you I just wanted 5 more minutes, honey," Trina called out, rushing to catch up, spotting Elias's booth and immediately slowing down, eyes wide with caution. But Leah was already there. She had barreled right past the 2 silent bodyguards, who looked utterly confused by this small, unstoppable force, and skidded to a stop right next to Elias. "Mommy, look." Leah pointed an accusatory little finger at her mother. "You said you were getting a milkshake. Why are you just sitting?" Aisha felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. Mark knew where Trina lived, he could be watching them. Seeing Leah here exposed was her worst fear made real. "Leah, honey, we need to go right now," Aisha urged, trying to grab her daughter's hand and pull her away. But Leah was captivated. She looked up at the massive man in the expensive suit and tilted her head, her bright eyes fixed not on his face, but on the small silvery scar that ran just beneath his left eye. It was an old injury, faint but noticeable, usually missed by those too intimidated to look closely. "Wow," Leah breathed, her voice filled with pure, innocent wonder. She reached up a tiny hand, stopping herself just short of touching him. "That scar is so cool." The silence that followed was profound. Elias Thorne, the man of influence, the silent watcher, the cold interrogator, was completely, utterly taken aback. His bodyguards stiffened, unsure how to handle this unexpected, adorable breach of security. Elias's face, which had been set in stone for the last hour, shifted. His eyes, usually assessing and cold, held a flicker of surprise, then something even stranger. A hesitant, almost nervous tenderness. Nobody called his scar cool. It was a marker of danger, a sign of a life he lived. Leah, oblivious to the history and the tension, didn't stop. "Are you a superhero? Did you fight a dragon?" she asked, her voice hushed with reverence. Elias cleared his throat, a deep sound that seemed to rumble in his chest. He didn't know how to talk to children, especially not tiny, unafraid ones. He glanced at Aisha, whose face was a mixture of absolute terror and mortification. He finally spoke, his answer quiet and unexpected. "Something like that, kid," he mumbled, a ghost of a smile appearing for the first time on his stern face. Leah beamed, climbing into the empty space on the booth seat beside her mother, instantly claiming the table. The oppressive tension that had been suffocating Aisha instantly dissipated, replaced by the light, easy atmosphere that only the innocence of a child can bring. Trina finally reached the table looking panicked. Aisha, I am so sorry. He saw the car. She insisted on waiting outside until I went in to check on you and then she just bolted. She was so worried about the milkshake. Aisha managed a strained smile for her friend. It's fine, Trina. Just take her back to the car. We're leaving now. Elias watched the interaction. The genuine terror in Aisha's eyes contrasted with the pure, unwavering trust in Leah's. He saw the mother's fear and the daughter's simple need for her parent. The sight of the child melted something cold inside him, connecting Aisha's abstract problem to a concrete, innocent victim. As Aisha stood up again, pulling Leah into her arms, Elias finally spoke, his command now firm but strangely protective. Wait. He looked at her and then gestured toward his bodyguard, the one named Marcus. Marcus. You take Aisha and her daughter to their car. You follow them home and make sure they get inside. Wait until the lights are on. Don't let anyone get near that car and make sure that street is clear when they arrive. He then looked pointedly at his other man, Ben. Ben, you stay. Aisha looked at him, disbelief mingling with relief. Mr. Thorne, I can't ask you to do that. Elias just gave her the briefest, most serious look. You didn't ask. I'm telling you. Go home, Aisha. And you tell your little superhero that I was just finishing a tough mission. Leah, nestled safely in Aisha's arms, waved enthusiastically at Elias. Bye, cool scar man. Elias simply nodded at the child. As Aisha, Leah and Marcus walked quickly toward the exit, Elias turned to Ben, his voice returning to its normal, steely authority. Find out everything about Mark. Where he lives, what he drives, and every threat he has ever made against Aisha Johnson or her daughter. I want details, he commanded. He then paused, his dark eyes fixed on the now empty seat where the little girl had just been. And Ben, he added, his voice quieter now, a low note of genuine confusion. I don't know why I care. Just make sure they are safe. He knew this wasn't his fight. He knew involving himself was dangerous and messy. But the image of that tiny pink-clad child and the honest, open fear in the mother's eyes had done something his rivals never could. It had broken through his cold indifference. He had started the night thinking she was a threat, and now he was dedicating his resources to saving her. Elias pulled out his own phone, the screen lighting up the faint scar beneath his eye, no longer a mark of danger, but a memory of a child's innocent praise. He was a dangerous man, but in that moment he felt a strange, stirring need for justice. A need that had nothing to do with money or power, and everything to do with a small pink jacket and a mother's desperate fear. Justice and love were winning, not through a dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet, unexpected, heartwarming intrusion of a 4-year-old demanding a milkshake. The command to find Mark had been simple and swift, delivered by Elias Thorne as soon as Aisha, Leah and Marcus were out the door of the Anchor. Ben, Elias's reliable right-hand man, had been on the phone since, working connections that operated beneath the city's usual radar. Elias sat back in the booth, nursing a glass of water, the innocence of Leah's visit still echoing in the space. He kept replaying the image of Aisha's trembling hands and the devastating fear in her eyes when she saw the text message. A mother's fear. It was a language even a man like Elias understood, though he hadn't heard it in decades. Ben finally ended a hushed conversation and leaned forward, his face grave. Boss, the ex-Mark Jones, Ben stated, laying a folder, a digital printout, on the table. He's not just an angry ex-boyfriend. He's tied into the Saintsford crew out of Scarborough. Small time, mostly debt collection and petty smuggling, but they've been trying to muscle in on our territory for months. Elias's cold focus sharpened instantly. The Saintsford crew. They were a violent, unpredictable faction that had been causing Elias trouble, poking at his operations like a thorn in his side. Jones is small fry, but he's deep with their leader, a weasel named Victor, Ben continued. He's been acting as their muscle and driver lately. The guy outside the restaurant? That was one of Victor's men trying to follow her. Elias picked up the report, his eyes scanning the photo of a smug-looking man with a cruel smile. Mark. The pieces snapped together with a harsh, sickening finality. Aisha was not a spy. She was not a messenger. She was bait. The photo we got yesterday, Elias murmured, referring to the image that showed Aisha near a rival family's territory. It wasn't a meeting. It was a surveillance shot. They were tracking her. She's the connection they're using to get to me, not the other way around. The realization hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. He had judged her, interrogated her, and threatened her based on a profound misunderstanding. The woman wasn't dangerous, she was desperately vulnerable. She was not a fox but a wounded deer, and she had stumbled right into the lair of the lion, who was coincidentally the fox's enemy. She didn't run from me, Ben, Elias concluded, his voice heavy with a dark realization. She ran from them. And when she ran to us, they got spooked. They think she's under my protection now. This changed everything. His conflict with the Saints Ford crew had just become intensely personal. They were harassing a woman and her child, using domestic terrorism as a tool for their turf war. Elias felt a slow, unfamiliar burn of pure rage. It wasn't the cold, calculating anger of a businessman. It was a deeper, protective fury. He had seen Leah's innocent face and recognized a basic truth. Some things were off-limits. "Get Marcus on the line," Elias commanded, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. "He is not to leave her side. Find her location and set up a perimeter. I want eyes on every street within a 5-block radius of her apartment. We need to be the shield before the bullet hits." Ben nodded, already reaching for his phone. "What do we do about Jones and Victor?" Elias looked at Mark's picture, his jaw tight. "We wait. Let them think they have her trapped. They'll make a mistake. When they do, we don't just take their territory, Ben. We dismantle them. No one threatens a mother and a child in my city." Meanwhile, Aisha was huddled on her small, worn sofa, her little apartment in a cozy, tree-lined suburb suddenly feeling too exposed, too quiet. Leah was asleep in her room, exhausted from the drama, dreaming of milkshakes and cool scar men. Marcus, Elias's bodyguard, was outside. She knew he was there, a silent, comforting mountain of security in the beat-up black sedan parked down the street. Elias had sent him to protect her, a chilling reminder that the danger was real and inescapable. She was scrolling through her contacts trying to find a distant cousin in Montreal, a Hail Mary attempt to disappear, when her phone buzzed again. It was Mark. She braced herself, her stomach clenching. She knew the threats. "I'll take Leah. I'll make sure you never work again." But this message was different. It was short, cold, and final. "Found your little friend. You can't run forever. You only delay the inevitable." A cold sweat broke out on Aisha's forehead. Found your little friend. Did he mean Trina, her sitter? Or did he mean Elias? The message was vague, yet utterly terrifying because it meant he was watching, tracking every move she made, even her frantic flight into the safety of the underworld. Aisha dropped the phone on the couch cushion, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip her knees. She felt the sickening realization that she wasn't hiding from Mark. She was now trapped between Mark and the dangerous men he worked for. She was caught in a crossfire between criminals who had guns and a desperate mother who had nothing but her love for her daughter. She looked toward Leah's closed bedroom door, tears blurring her vision. She couldn't stay here. The protection of Elias was a temporary band-aid, but it wouldn't last forever. She needed to vanish. Just as the despair began to consume her, her phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Mark. It was a text from an unknown number. She hesitantly opened it. "I know you are scared. He will not touch you or the child. We are outside. Lock all doors and windows. You are safe tonight." The text was brief and signed and yet carried the unmistakable tone of quiet, absolute authority. It was Elias. A wave of overwhelming, exhausting relief washed over her. It wasn't the kind of relief that meant the problem was solved, but the kind that meant she could stop fighting for 1 hour and just breathe. A strange warmth spread through her chest. This dangerous man, convinced she was a spy just hours ago, was now extending a literal, anonymous lifeline of protection. She wasn't fighting alone tonight. She walked slowly, quietly to the front window. She pulled the curtain back just an inch and peered out. Down the street, the black sedan was still there, a solid silhouette in the pale glow of the street lamp. A moment later, she noticed a second car, a nondescript SUV, idling around the corner. She wasn't just guarded, she was protected. Her panic subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. She might be prey, but she had stumbled into the territory of a powerful protector, a man who, for reasons she couldn't fathom, was now willing to fight for her. He had a chance. Aisha locked the deadbolt, double-checked the windows and walked to Leah's room. She stood over her daughter, watching her sleep, feeling the fierce, protective love that had fueled her entire desperate run. She was safe tonight and tomorrow she would figure out the next step. The next morning, the suburban quiet felt deceptive, like the silence right before a storm. Aisha woke up tense, having barely slept. She knew she couldn't stay locked in forever. Leah needed fresh air, and Aisha needed to pick up a few absolute necessities she couldn't risk ordering online, like the special formula for Leah's sensitive tummy. She dressed Leah quickly, bundling her in her favorite pink jacket. As they stepped out the door of the Toronto apartment, Marcus, the quiet bodyguard, was instantly alert, opening the back door of the black sedan. "We're just going to the local market, Marcus, 2 blocks down," Aisha told him, trying to sound normal. "Understood, Ms. Johnson." "Stay within sight," Marcus replied, his voice firm. They arrived at the small, busy market, the kind of place filled with the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. Aisha quickly grabbed the formula and some bread, keeping Leah close to her side. As they walked back towards the sedan, the street was bustling. Leah, energized by the fresh air and feeling safe near her mother, suddenly spotted a small, colorful ball that had rolled off the sidewalk and into the street near a parked delivery truck. "Ball. Mommy, wait!" Leah cried, pulling free from Aisha's grasp with the sudden, surprising strength of a 4-year-old. Aisha shouted, "Leah, stop!" But the child was already darting into the edge of the street, completely focused on the toy. In the same second, a beat-up dark van that had been idling discreetly down the block suddenly roared to life. It accelerated fast, tires squealing, heading straight towards Leah. The back door of the van slid open and a man, not Mark but one of the thuggish-looking members of the Saintsford crew, leaned out, clearly aiming to snatch the child and pull her inside. Aisha screamed, a sound ripped from the core of her being, and lunged forward, but she was too far away, paralyzed by the sheer speed of the terror. Then a flash of charcoal gray and sheer, terrifying speed intervened. Elias Thorne hadn't planned to be there. He was supposed to be running his organization from his office, but the cold realization that she was innocent prey had driven him to come oversee the protection himself. He had been parked across the street, watching, a silent sentinel. When the van moved, Elias moved faster. He burst from his car like a coiled spring, a man who moved with a grace that belied his size. He didn't think, he acted on a primal protective instinct that shocked even himself. He covered the distance in 2 giant strides, reaching Leah an instant before the kidnapper's hand could close around her pink jacket. Elias scooped Leah up in one massive arm, pulling her tightly against his chest. He spun, using his own body as a shield just as the van sped past, the kidnapper's hand swiping uselessly at the air where Leah had been. Marcus, meanwhile, had recovered instantly, drawing a weapon that was quickly concealed under his jacket, but the threat was already gone. The van, realizing they had missed, vanished around the nearest corner. The entire rescue took less than 5 seconds. Elias stood there, breathing heavily, his suit now rumpled, his face a mask of furious, concentrated relief. Leah, shocked but unharmed, buried her face in his neck, clutching his expensive lapel. Aisha ran to them, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She dropped to her knees right there on the pavement, reaching up to wrap her arms around both of them, her child and the man who had just saved her. She pulled Leah away gently, examining her with frantic hands, checking every limb. Leah was crying now, soft, terrified sobs, but she was safe. Aisha looked up at Elias, her vision blurred by tears. She saw the rage, yes, but underneath it she saw a flicker of pure terror, the kind of stark fear only experienced when someone precious is nearly lost. She saw the humanity he usually hid beneath his ruthless exterior, revealed in the raw urgency of his rescue. This wasn't a ruthless boss protecting his asset. This was a man protecting the innocent. They almost took her, Aisha choked out, tears finally streaming down her face, the terrifying adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She dissolved into heaving sobs, the stress of weeks of running and the horror of the last few seconds breaking her down completely. Elias, still holding the whimpering child, looked down at the distraught woman. He was normally cold, untouchable. But seeing Aisha's raw grief and exhaustion, and feeling the tiny, desperate weight of Leah in his arms, stirred something deep within him. He knelt down slowly, one knee on the asphalt, bringing them both down to Aisha's level. He didn't say anything. He just rested his free hand gently on Aisha's shoulder, a silent, steady anchor in her storm of emotion. Leah looked up from his suit, her big eyes red and wet. She saw the scar beneath his eye, no longer cool, but a symbol of his sudden, terrifying power. "Don't go, Scar Man," Leah whispered, her voice trembling. She tightened her grip on his suit jacket, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. She refused to leave his arms. Elias looked from the weeping mother to the terrified child, and the last of his emotional distance evaporated. This was real. This was a life-or-death situation he had accidentally become the central figure in. He stood up smoothly, still holding Leah securely. He looked at Marcus, his face now devoid of emotion but radiating lethal intent. "Get them in the car. Take them straight back to the safe house. Ben's men stay on this street until we find the van," Elias commanded, his voice a quiet, dangerous thunder. As Marcus opened the car door, Elias held Leah close. He walked her to the sedan, a giant in a tailored suit carefully carrying a small, pink-jacketed child. Just before Elias put Leah in the car, a battered sedan that had been parked down the street peeled out, speeding past them. A younger man, his face sneering, leaned out the passenger window, shouting over the engine's roar. "You win this round, Thorn. We'll get the girl. She has something everyone wants, even you." The words, shouted in contempt, hit Elias and Aisha with a new, terrifying implication. This wasn't just about Mark's revenge anymore. They were looking for something the child had. Elias put Leah safely into the car, his jaw rigid, watching the sedan disappear. He knew the Saintsford crew didn't just want the child. They believed she was carrying something of immense value enough to risk a direct confrontation with him. Elias looked at Aisha, her face pale with shock. They had saved her, but the situation had just become 10 times more perilous. The silence inside Elias Thorne's black sedan was heavy, broken only by Leah's soft, exhausted breathing as she slept, curled up safely in her mother's lap. Aisha was still shaking, her mind replaying the sight of that van and the terrifying threat shouted by the fleeing gang member. Elias drove, his movements precise, his jaw set hard. He wasn't taking them back to Aisha's apartment. He was heading toward the high-rises that glittered over the downtown core of the city. "Where are we going, Mr. Thorne?" Aisha finally asked, her voice raspy. Elias glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "A safe place. My apartment building. High security. No one gets in without my say-so." He pulled the car into an underground garage, the kind of place where every corner was watched by cameras and only black, expensive cars seemed to exist. They rode a private elevator up to a penthouse floor. The apartment itself was stunning. All glass walls, minimalist furniture, and a view of the sprawling city that was both breathtaking and intimidating. Elias turned to Aisha, his tone brooking no argument. "You and Leah are staying here. Until my men neutralize Mark and the Saintsford crew. It's not a request, Aisha. After today it's a necessary measure. They won't stop." Aisha immediately bristled, the fear momentarily replaced by a single mother's fierce independence. "I appreciate the rescue, but I can't stay here. I have a job, Mr. Thorne. I have a life. And I don't live with you. I'm not a part of your world. Your job and your life were nearly erased on a street corner 2 hours ago," Elias countered, his voice cold and rational. "Here you have a solid wall, surveillance, and 2 armed men 24/7. Out there you have a deadbolt and a target on your back. Choose, Aisha." Aisha opened her mouth to argue again, but a loud, frantic buzzing interrupted her. Her phone was ringing. It was Mark. She knew she shouldn't answer, but something made her swipe the screen. She put the phone on speaker, her hand already trembling. Mark, screaming, "You think you're safe, Aisha? You think that suited piece of garbage can stop me? He can't keep you and the girl forever. You come back to me or I swear to God I'm taking everything you love. I know where you work. I know where your mother lives. This isn't over." The call cut off abruptly. Aisha stared at the phone in her hand, the blood draining from her face. He had called her mother's house. The man was completely unhinged. She looked up at Elias, the fight draining out of her. "My mother. She's frail," Aisha whispered, defeated. Elias's expression hardened. "The choice has been made, Aisha. You and Leah stay here. It's the only way to draw their fire onto me where it belongs and keep you safe." "Fine," she choked out, a wave of sickening resignation washing over her. But don't call this protection. This is a prison. Elias didn't disagree. He simply signaled to his men who had followed them up, Marcus and Ben. Marcus, you take the floor shift. Ben, you secure the external surveillance, Elias commanded. He paused, looking at the two massive men who were used to handling weapons, ledgers and threats, but absolutely nothing that weighed less than 100 pounds. And, Elias added, a hint of something strange, maybe amusement, in his voice. The child wakes up in an hour. Figure it out. And that's when the forced protection turned hilarious. Leah woke up about an hour later, still slightly groggy but quickly spotting two very large, very scary-looking men in black suits standing near the living room window. Marcus and Ben, the steely enforcers, were terrified. They stood like statues trying to blend into the minimalist decor. Leah immediately pointed at Marcus, the gentler of the two. "Mommy, who's the giant?" Aisha, exhausted, just sighed. "That's Marcus, honey. He's here to help." Marcus, realizing he was being addressed, gave a stiff, military-style nod. "A morning," he mumbled, sounding like he'd swallowed a rock. Leah, however, was delighted. She was fascinated by their sheer size and their dark, serious clothes. "Can you play blocks with me?" Leah asked Ben, holding up a small, colorful wooden cube. Ben, a man whose hands were permanently scarred from years of hard life, looked at the block as if it might explode. He glanced desperately at Elias, who was now leaning against the doorframe, trying hard not to smile. "Ben," Elias said without moving. The child asked a question. With a deep sigh, Ben slowly bent down, his enormous suit straining. He took the tiny block, his huge hand completely dwarfing it, and placed it gingerly on the thick carpet. Leah instantly burst into giggles. "That's not how you build a tower, silly. You need another one." For the next hour, a bizarre scene unfolded. Two of the most feared men in the city were awkwardly trying to build a castle out of brightly colored blocks, occasionally whispering strategy to each other. "No, idiot, the blue one goes on the bottom for structural integrity," Ben hissed at Marcus. "It's a children's game, Ben, not a multi-million-dollar real estate deal." Marcus muttered back, his eyes darting to the closed bedroom door, terrified the boss would walk in. Leah was in heaven, bossing them around, forcing Marcus to wear a princess crown made of construction paper, and making Ben, the man who specialized in intimidation, giggle when he accidentally knocked over the entire tower. The atmosphere, which had been thick with fear and tension, was now warm, strange, and undeniably domestic. Aisha watched from the kitchen, a quiet, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in days. The fear was still a dull ache, but watching the hard shells of these men crack open, even just slightly, for her daughter was a heartwarming sight. She saw not the Mafia but two very large, very clumsy uncles. She had just met the most dangerous man in the city, and now he was babysitting her child with his terrified crew. It was an impossible situation, but as Leah snorted with laughter when Ben tried to use a tiny plastic horse as a support beam, Aisha realized. If this strange, fearsome man was going to protect her, she might as well make the best of his ridiculously secure prison. For the first time since she started running, Aisha felt a flicker of hope that everything might just be okay. It turns out even the toughest bodyguards are no match for a 4-year-old with a princess crown. Aisha is safe, Leah is happy, and the safe house is starting to feel less like a prison and more like the most heavily guarded daycare in the city. But not everyone is happy about Elias's sudden change in priorities. Later that evening, after the men had settled down and Leah was asleep, Elias was alone, staring out the window at the glittering city lights. A shadow fell across the room. It was his cousin Dominic, a man who handled the organization's finances and had known Elias his entire life. Dominic didn't mince words. "A single mother and her kid? Elias, this isn't you," Dominic said, his voice low and serious. "The Saintsford crew thinks she's carrying something valuable and they're willing to start a war for it. You know what they're saying about you." Elias didn't turn around. "I don't care what they're saying." Dominic stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that Elias couldn't ignore. "Are you protecting her, or hiding her?" The atmosphere in Elias's apartment that morning was heavy, the usual tension mixed with the unspoken question Dominic had left hanging in the air. Was Elias protecting Aisha or hiding her? Aisha found Elias in the sleek, modern kitchen, already dressed in his immaculate suit, drinking black coffee. Leah was thankfully distracted by Ben and Marcus, who were attempting to teach her a complicated knot that was meant for securing shipping containers, not tying shoelaces. Aisha walked up to Elias, her hands clenched. She hadn't slept, haunted by Mark's threatening call and the accusation that she possessed something valuable. The truth she knew was her only currency now. "I need to talk to you," Aisha said, her voice low. Elias put down his cup, his eyes meeting hers, serious and steady. "I'm listening." "You asked me why the Saintsford crew wants Leah," she began, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "They don't want Leah, not really. They want me because of what I know and what I saw." Elias leaned against the counter, his posture relaxing slightly, a nonverbal encouragement to continue. Aisha took a deep, shaky breath. "When I left Kingston a few months ago, Mark was trying to keep me there. He was doing shady things. Things I didn't want to see. I finally realized he wasn't just working small-time debt collection like he told me. He was driving big trucks at night, meeting people at abandoned docks." He paused, remembering the chilling specifics. "A week before I took Leah and ran, I followed him. I saw him with the leader of the Saintsford crew, Victor, right? They were moving people, Mr. Thorne. Young people. They were bringing them off a ship, shackled in the back of the trucks Mark drove. It was a whole network." Aisha's voice broke on the last word. She pressed her hand to her mouth, the memory causing a deep, physical revulsion. "He was involved in human trafficking. That's the crime I saw." Elias's cold reserve shattered. His face, usually a masterpiece of controlled indifference, tightened with genuine disgust and a searing, focused anger. "Trafficking," he repeated, the word a harsh curse. This information hit him like a shockwave, directly connecting her personal fear to his professional mission. Elias had been fighting the Saintsford crew because they were encroaching on his territory, yes, but more importantly, he had been trying to dismantle them for months because of a quiet, relentless campaign he was running to stamp out the trafficking networks that were infecting the city's underbelly. This was personal for Elias, tied to a loss in his past, a motivation he never spoke of. "They're not just moving drugs or cash," Elias stated, his eyes now blazing with a terrifying intensity. "They are running a smuggling ring that funnels people through the port. I've been trying to find the weak link for months. You saw it." He looked at Aisha, his suspicion of her having been a spy now completely replaced by a potent mix of respect and protective rage. She wasn't an asset, she was a witness, a victim, and now the key to destroying the network he hated most. "That's why Mark is so desperate," Elias continued, pacing once, his control barely intact. "He thinks you can identify the faces or the locations. He's afraid you'll go to the authorities." "I was afraid to go to the police," Aisha admitted, her eyes glistening. "He has friends everywhere. I knew if I stayed they'd silence me. So I ran. That's why I landed here." Elias stopped pacing, resting his hand on the counter near hers. His usual emotional distance was rapidly eroding, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. He sensed her trust now, fragile and profound, the trust of a desperate woman who had nowhere else to turn. "Thank you, Aisha," he said, the genuine gratitude in his voice surprising them both. "You just gave me the information I needed to end this." He reached out, his large hand gently closing over hers in a brief but powerful moment of solidarity. "No one is going to touch you or Leah." The warmth of his hand was a shock. It was the touch of a man, not a monolith. Aisha didn't pull away immediately. She let the unexpected connection linger, drawing strength from his steady presence. But even as she relied on his protection, the deeper, more terrifying truth still sat like a stone in her chest. She pulled her hand back slightly. There's still something else," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Something I didn't tell you. Something that changes everything." Elias tilted her chin up gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. He saw the new layer of fear, a fear that went beyond Mark or the Saintsford crew. He saw the guilt of a secret she was terrified to confess. "What is it, Aisha?" he asked, his voice low and compelling, no longer demanding information but seeking trust. "I told you you are safe here. Tell me." Aisha opened her mouth, the words catching in her throat, the gravity of her final secret too immense to utter. Just then, Leah came running back into the kitchen, followed by a relieved-looking Ben and Marcus. "Mommy! Scarman!" Leah shouted, holding up her tiny sneaker. Marcus fixed my lace with a special knot. See. As Aisha knelt to admire the ridiculously complicated fisherman's knot on Leah's shoe, Elias watched them, his expression soft but intense. He saw the bond, the innocence, the sheer impossibility of the situation. He knew this woman, cornered and terrified, held the key to his entire operation and she was still holding back. But he also sensed that her secret wasn't a betrayal. It was a desperate measure of survival. He made a silent promise. He would wait for the rest of her truth, but he would not let her go until the trafficking network was destroyed and she was truly free. That night, as Elias made his final rounds, checking the security feed, he watched Aisha tuck Leah into bed on the surprisingly cozy safe house floor. He saw her kiss her daughter, her face a picture of exhausted love. He felt an emotional distance melt away that he hadn't even realized he possessed. He watched the monitors, seeing Marcus's steady gaze and Ben's hulking silhouette near the windows. Everything was secure. Too secure. He almost missed it. On the live feed of the internal camera, a tiny, dark flicker of movement near Leah's bed. It was just a second, a fleeting shadow near the little wooden bedside table where Leah had left her sneakers. Elias rewound the footage, his breath catching. He zoomed in on Leah's brightly lit pink sneaker, the one with Marcus's fancy knot. He could clearly see a tiny coin-sized electronic disc now adhered discreetly to the sole. Someone had placed a tracker under the child's shoe, and no one in the room knew who. The hair rose on the back of Elias's neck. This wasn't the Saints Ford crew. This was too clean, too discreet, too close. It had to be someone inside his organization, someone who had access to the apartment while they were distracted by Leah. He stared at the screen, the rage in his heart turning to ice. The mole wasn't external. The betrayal was internal. The threat was inside his walls and Leah was now a moving target. The discovery of the tracker on Leah's shoe had turned the safe apartment into a cage. Elias's fury was cold and precise. He didn't tell Aisha, knowing the fear would be paralyzing. Instead, he simply stated they needed to relocate immediately. But first he needed to gauge how closely they were being watched. He decided on a controlled move, a routine errand that would serve as a decoy. Aisha needed to pick up a few documents from her bank's secure deposit box, a necessary step for her final escape plan, which he knew they wouldn't let her carry out. The morning was gray and overcast in downtown, the streets slick with a recent drizzle. Elias insisted on driving himself with Aisha in the passenger seat and Leah buckled securely in the back. Ben and Marcus followed in a separate surveillance car, tracking them from a short distance. Elias had subtly removed the tracker from Leah's shoe earlier that morning, a tiny victory he kept to himself. But he knew the enemy would be expecting them to make a move. He was baiting the trap. As they pulled up to the curb outside the massive granite structure of the bank, Elias turned to Aisha. "Stay in the car with Leah. I'll go inside," he said, the lie smooth and quick. Aisha shook her head, her face pale. "No. I need to get the box myself. I can't leave you. And I can't leave her." The fear of separation was stronger than the need for safety. Elias hesitated, seeing the deep-seated worry in her eyes. He gave a sharp nod. "Fine. We all go. Stay glued to me. Do not look away." They entered the imposing bank lobby, Elias holding Leah's small hand in his large one, Aisha walking tightly pressed against his other side. They retrieved the small box and as they were walking back out the air changed. A sudden sharp crash echoed through the lobby. 3 heavy-set men in dark, identical clothing and ski masks burst through a side entrance, brandishing long, heavy pipes. They weren't interested in the bank tellers. Their eyes were locked onto Elias and Aisha. "Thorne. Drop the woman," one of the masked figures bellowed, his voice distorted by the mask. The ambush was immediate and brutal. The few people in the lobby scattered, screaming. Elias reacted with the instantaneous ferocity of a protective animal. He shoved Aisha and Leah behind the nearest marble pillar, positioning his body entirely between them and the attackers. "Stay down. Don't move," he roared at Aisha, his voice unrecognizable, stripped of its usual smooth control, raw and terrifying. Elias didn't draw a gun, he didn't need to. He moved like a controlled storm. As the first attacker swung a pipe toward his head, Elias intercepted it with his forearm, the force of the blow audible but he barely flinched. He used the brief moment of shock on the attacker's part to grab the pipe, twist it out of the man's hand, and smashed the heavy end into the attacker's side. The man collapsed with a wheezing cry. Aisha watched in horrified fascination. She had seen Elias the sophisticated boss and Elias the gentle protector of her child. Now she saw Elias the predator. His movements were precise, ruthless, and fueled by a terrifying, burning rage she had never imagined. He wasn't just defending, he was obliterating the threat. This was the dark, dangerous side of his nature, unleashed entirely for their defense. The second attacker rushed him and Elias met him head-on, delivering a series of rapid, devastating blows. A hard knee to the stomach followed by a vicious elbow to the jaw. The attacker crumpled. Meanwhile, Ben and Marcus, having spotted the ambush from outside, burst through the front doors, weapons drawn but held low, focusing on securing the perimeter. They knew the boss had the situation under control, but their presence was needed to ensure no one else got involved. The third attacker, realizing he was outmatched, changed targets. He lunged around Elias and scrambled toward Aisha, clearly intending to grab her. Aisha screamed, pulling Leah tighter. Elias saw the movement. With a guttural roar, he launched himself across the floor, intercepting the third attacker just as he reached the pillar. Elias slammed the man into the marble column, pinning him there with a force that cracked the air. The man struggled, but Elias's grip was like steel. "You touch her," Elias snarled, his voice a low, vibrating menace, "and I will erase everything you have ever known." The attacker, seeing the pure, cold death in Elias's eyes, ceased struggling, his body going limp with sheer terror. The fight was over in less than a minute. Silence descended, broken only by the hurried whispers of the bank staff calling the police and Leah's desperate, high-pitched sobs. Elias didn't wait. He released the attacker, who instantly slumped to the floor, stunned and defeated. Elias turned immediately to Aisha and Leah. Aisha was curled around her daughter, tears streaming down her face, but she was unharmed. Elias dropped to his knees, ignoring the pain in his arm from the pipe strike, and pulled them both into his embrace. Leah, traumatized and clinging to him like a terrified limpet, buried her face in the rough fabric of his suit jacket. She was sobbing, the sound tearing at Elias's heart. "Don't let them take Mommy," Leah wept, the words muffled against his chest, repeating the phrase like a mantra. "Don't let them take Mommy." Elias held her tightly, rocking them both, his eyes closed. He felt a wave of protective love so immense it almost buckled him. He realized in that moment that this woman and her child were no longer a complication or an asset. They were his. "Never," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his promise absolute. "I won't let them touch either of you." He slowly stood up, still holding Leah securely. Marcus and Ben moved in to detain the attackers and secure the area, telling the bank managers that this was a private security matter. As Ben frisked the last subdued attacker, he found a phone that had fallen out of the man's pocket during the struggle. "Boss," Ben said, handing the cheap burner phone to Elias. Elias took the phone, his gaze still fixed on Aisha, who was slowly standing up, looking at him with a mixture of terror, awe, and burgeoning trust. He looked down at the phone, pressing the screen to see the call log. The last outgoing call wasn't to Mark or Victor. It was to an internal number. Elias's eyes widened, the cold realization hitting him with the force of a bullet. The name registered immediately, the private line belonging to his own chief of security. The mole wasn't a bodyguard. The mole was right at the top of his organization, watching every move from the inside. The terrifying ambush at the bank and the gut-wrenching realization of the internal mole changed Elias Thorne's strategy completely. The city was no longer safe. His own organization was compromised. Within hours of returning to the compromised penthouse, he had relocated Aisha and Leah. The new location was an isolated estate nestled deep in the wooded, wealthier outskirts of the city, a place Elias owned for absolute privacy, a fortress disguised as a luxury home. It was guarded, secluded, and completely disconnected from the network the mole could easily access. When they arrived, Aisha was still pale with shock, her hands wrapped around a thermos of hot tea Marcus had insisted on making. She looked around the massive, quiet house with its towering windows and acres of dense forest outside, feeling a renewed, unsettling sense of isolation, but also undeniable safety. Elias had been moving with a cold, focused intensity since discovering the chief of security's betrayal. He hadn't told Aisha the full details, only that their previous location was no longer secure. He immediately ordered Ben and Marcus to begin a silent, thorough investigation to find the mole, starting with the chief of security's known movements and contacts. "Nobody moves on this property without my knowledge," Elias commanded his men later that evening, his voice tight with lethal control. "And nobody speaks about the situation outside of these walls. We are in lockdown until I confirm that traitor is neutralized." With the world sealed off, the three of them, Elias, Aisha and Leah, were forced into an intimate, unnatural rhythm. The forced proximity quickly began to intensify the subtle, slow-burn tension between Elias and Aisha. Elias was a man built for command, not domesticity. He was used to quiet, formality and distance. Now he found himself sharing space with the constant, gentle chaos of a mother and her child. They shared meals at a huge wooden dining table, meals prepared by Marcus, who had unexpectedly revealed a talent for making comfort food. Aisha insisted he make jerk chicken. During these dinners, Aisha would talk about Leah's school, or her old life in Jamaica, simple, grounded stories that were a world away from Elias's brutal business. He would listen, silently at first, then slowly, hesitantly, contributing a rare comment about the city or a detail about the house. In the late-night conversations, the tension grew stronger. After Leah was asleep, Aisha would sometimes find Elias standing by the panoramic window, staring into the dark woods. She would join him, bringing him a cup of tea, and they would talk. Aisha learned that his sharp, ruthless exterior wasn't just a mask. It was armor built from a difficult life he would only hint at. Elias, in turn, learned about Aisha's fierce love for Leah, the strength it took to run from Kingston, and the guilt she carried for involving her child in her escape. One night, talking about his organization's fight against trafficking, Elias almost let his guard down. "Some evils," he said, his voice unusually raw, "they don't just take lives. They steal futures. I hate it. I won't allow it." The intensity in his eyes was almost unbearable, revealing a deep, unhealed wound in his past that fueled his war. Aisha didn't push, but the shared moment created a new, undeniable bond, a shared purpose beyond the current danger. The unintentional closeness was everywhere. A moment in the kitchen where their hands brushed, reaching for the same fruit bowl. A tense, quiet second in the living room as they both watched Leah play, sharing a small, protective smile. Elias would often catch himself watching Aisha, the way she moved, the focused brow as she read a book, the deep worry in her eyes, and he would quickly look away, startled by the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. He was falling slowly and reluctantly for the woman he had sworn not to touch. The real emotional engine, however, was Leah. The little girl had an uncanny ability to navigate straight past Elias's defenses. To her, Elias wasn't a crime boss or a ruthless man. He was simply her brave, strong Scar man, who made her laugh and who kept the mean men away. Leah had bonded with Elias completely, having been safely carried in his arms through the most terrifying moment of her young life. She now followed him everywhere, seeing him not as a temporary refuge, but as a permanent fixture. One afternoon, Leah was sitting on the floor of the massive living room, sorting through a box of toys Marcus had brought in from the city. Elias was sitting in a leather armchair nearby, reviewing security reports, a cold, intense look on his face. Leah toddled over to him, leaning her head against his knee, her pink jacket discarded on the floor. She looked up at his stern face, her eyes wide and innocent. "Scar man?" she asked quietly, twisting a loose thread on his trousers. Elias lowered the report, looking at the top of her head. "Yes, Leah? Can you be our protector forever?" The question hung in the vast, echoing silence of the estate. It was a request wrapped in pure, innocent trust, a plea for the safety and stability that only his intimidating presence provided. Elias froze. Forever. The word felt impossibly heavy, carrying all the future risks and responsibilities he desperately avoided. He was a man of temporary arrangements, not permanent commitments. He looked at Leah's hopeful eyes, then over at Aisha, who was watching them, her expression a careful, tender mix of hope and sorrow. He cleared his throat, unable to look away from the child's expectant face. "I'll do my best, Leah," he finally mumbled, his voice thick with unaccustomed emotion. "I will do my best." The answer was hesitant, but the protective resolve in his eyes was absolute. He couldn't promise forever, but he would certainly protect them until the last threat was gone. Later that night, long after Aisha and Leah were asleep, Elias was reviewing the security footage from the day they moved into the estate. Ben had been thorough, documenting every vehicle and every person who had arrived. The footage showed Ben's car loaded with their luggage pulling up to the main gate. A few minutes later, the camera captured a brief, silent meeting in the thick woods bordering the property. The shadows were deep, but the figures were unmistakable. Elias leaned forward, his knuckles white on the desk. One figure was Mark, Aisha's violent ex. The other figure was Ben, his loyal right-hand man. On the screen, Ben passed a small, dark object, the necklace Aisha always wore, to Mark. Then they exchanged a quick, furtive handshake before Ben melted back into the shadows of the estate. Elias stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. It wasn't the chief of security. It was his most trusted man. Elias discovered security footage of his right-hand man meeting secretly with her ex. The betrayal was complete. The betrayal of Ben had ripped through Elias's world, leaving him cold with fury and deeply wounded. He knew he had to confront Ben, but not until he understood the full scope of what Ben had given Mark. He needed to know what was hidden in Aisha's necklace. The realization that his most trusted man was a traitor, combined with the stress of the past 24 hours, made him seek out Aisha. He found her in the estate's sunroom, watching the quiet woods, a silver locket resting against her collarbone. He sat across from her, his face granite hard. "Aisha, I need the rest of the truth. Now," he said, his voice quiet but demanding. "The man who ambushed us at the bank was targeting you, not the money. The enemy outside is working with someone inside my operation. And they are all looking for something valuable that you possess." Aisha looked at him, her eyes tired and red, but her posture held a final, desperate resolve. The fight had drained her, and the protective loyalty she felt toward Elias now was stronger than her fear of his reaction. She knew she couldn't keep the secret anymore. It was putting everyone in danger. She reached up and gently touched the silver locket she always wore, a simple engraved piece that looked like an inexpensive heirloom. "It's true," she confessed, her voice shaking. "It wasn't just that I saw Mark committing the crime. When I realized he was involved in human trafficking, I knew I had to expose him. But I knew the police would never believe a daycare worker against a crew like the Saints Ford." She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "So, I took a risk. I was Mark's partner for years. I knew his passwords. I hacked into his encrypted laptop and copied everything." Elias leaned forward, his whole attention focused on her. "Copied what, Aisha?" "Proof," she whispered, tears finally welling up and spilling down her cheeks. "Digital evidence. Photos of the vehicles, video of the docks, the ledger detailing the dates, the names of the key players, even recordings of Mark and Victor discussing the payments. Everything needed to sink the entire operation." She slowly unclasped the silver locket and held it out to Elias. It was slightly warm from her skin. "The full truth," Aisha admitted, her voice cracking with the strain of the confession, "is that I didn't just run from Mark. I stole proof, digital evidence hidden in a necklace I wear daily. This locket isn't just a necklace, Mr. Thorne. It holds a tiny micro-SD card." Aisha finally broke down, the years of tension and the fear for Leah crashing down on her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I didn't trust the police, so I ran," she admitted, the words muffled. "I thought if I could just get to Canada, get Leah settled, I could decide what to do. But I was afraid of the evidence being found, so I hid it. I ran and I ran and I ran until I ran right into you." Elias didn't speak for a long moment. He gently took the locket, his large fingers carefully examining the tiny, almost invisible slot where the memory card was housed. He realized the weight of what he held, not just a piece of jewelry, but the ultimate weapon against the trafficking network he was desperate to destroy. He looked at Aisha, her small body racked with grief, and all the cold suspicion he once held evaporated. He was never a threat. She was a hero, a desperate mother who had risked everything, including her life, to fight a monstrous evil alone. Elias realized she was never a threat. She was the key to shutting down the entire rival network. Her actions weren't born of malice or rivalry, but of courage and pure, protective love. He put the locket down and reached for her, pulling her against his chest in a powerful, comforting embrace. This time there was no reservation, only the silent, deep understanding of two people united against a common enemy. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, Aisha," he murmured into her hair. "You did the right thing. You ran to the right place. We're going to use this. We're going to end them." He held her until her tears subsided, offering her a strength that was steady and absolute. Later that evening, after a quiet, tense dinner where Elias was unusually silent, consumed by thoughts of the betrayal and the evidence, he knew he couldn't keep the memory card on his person. It was too valuable. He told Aisha that he was going to download the evidence and store the card in a secret safe deposit box only he knew about. Aisha, completely exhausted and trusting him implicitly now, agreed. She went to bed, Leah already asleep, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. The secret was out. The burden was shared. Elias was going to take care of everything. In the dead of night, the sprawling estate was silent, the security lights casting long, lonely shadows across the lawn. The only sound was the soft hum of the ventilation system. Elias was in his study, painstakingly backing up the microSD card's contents onto an encrypted drive. The original necklace, now empty of the card, rested on his desk. He worked for hours, determined to neutralize the threat before he confronted Ben. He finally finished just as the first hint of false dawn broke the sky. He reached for the locket to put it into a secure pouch. But the space on the desk was empty. Elias frowned, his eyes scanning the cleared surface. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't moved it. He pushed back his chair, his heart suddenly hammering in his chest with cold dread. He looked down at the floor under the desk, searching frantically. The silver locket was gone. Someone had been in the study. While he was working, downloading the evidence, someone had slipped in and quietly, meticulously stolen the necklace overnight. Stolen the final empty piece of the puzzle that Ben had risked everything to acquire. The betrayal ran deeper than just the surveillance. Elias stood up, running a hand through his hair, his eyes burning with fury and fear. He had revealed his true location to the mole, and in return the mole had stripped him of his key evidence. He knew exactly where the necklace was going, straight to Ben and Mark. The sun was barely up, but the serene quiet of the isolated estate was shattered by Elias Thorne's cold, absolute rage. The confrontation with Ben, his right-hand man, was immediate and took place in the silent, tense sanctuary of the study. Elias stood by the desk where the locket had rested, his massive frame radiating a terrifying stillness. Ben stood opposite him, his head bowed, the usual steely confidence of the enforcer completely gone, replaced by a defeated slump. "The footage, Ben. The tracking device. The necklace." "Explain," Elias commanded, his voice deadly quiet, more menacing than any shout. Ben didn't try to lie. He knew there was no point. He took a deep, ragged breath. "They got to me, boss. They didn't threaten money or territory. They threatened my sister Clara, down in Florida. They knew her job, her apartment, everything. Victor, the leader of the Saintsford crew, he's smart. He knows the only way to break you is through those you care about." Ben lifted his eyes, which were filled with genuine anguish. He admitted he was blackmailed into cooperating with the enemy. "I didn't want to hurt you, Elias. I love you like a brother. But Clara, she's all I have left. Victor said if I didn't confirm the location and get the necklace, he'd send Mark to her. I gave them the locket, boss. I never touched the evidence. I just confirmed they were here and I got the empty piece they thought held the key." Elias stared at him, the hurt of the betrayal warring with the recognition of a familiar motive: protection. But Ben had chosen family over the innocent lives Elias had sworn to protect. "You put a child in danger, Ben. You risked her life," Elias said, his voice flat with disappointment. "I know," Ben whispered. "And I'll pay for it. But I thought if I gave them what they asked for, they would back off. I didn't think they'd attack immediately." Before the boss could decide his fate, before Elias could decide whether to banish him or forgive him, a massive, muffled boom echoed through the house. The entire study shuddered. "What was that?" Aisha cried, rushing into the study, still in her robe, her face stricken with fresh panic. "Inside job," Elias roared, his tactical mind taking over instantly. "They breached the perimeter. The mole must have given them the access codes." He grabbed Aisha's arm. "Get Leah down. Go out the back door through the conservatory. Marcus will meet you there." Aisha didn't hesitate. She turned and ran straight toward Leah's room. Elias whirled on Ben, the forgiveness forgotten, replaced by a desperate, shared need for survival. You caused this. Now you fix it. Find the service tunnel plans in the safe. Get a team ready. Move. Ben didn't need to be told twice. He nodded grimly and sprinted toward the wall safe, redemption his only goal. The attack was swift and brutal, launched by masked figures who had infiltrated the estate's service tunnels and emerged inside the house. They weren't there for a fight, they were there for a snatch and grab. Aisha burst into Leah's room. The child was awake, sitting up in bed, crying from the shock of the blast. Aisha snatched her up, bundling her into her arms. It's okay, baby, we're going on an adventure. Aisha soothed, running out of the room and toward the back of the house. But the attackers were faster. As Aisha entered the main corridor, a wall of smoke and fire met her. A blast, clearly intended to separate them, had detonated in the center of the house, turning the hallway into a raging inferno. The heat was immediate and suffocating. "Mommy!" Leah screamed, clinging to her neck. She and her child are separated in the chaos. The heat and flames were too intense for Aisha to cross with Leah. She saw a small utility closet across the hall, a temporary haven. "Hold tight, honey." Aisha coughed, shoving herself and Leah into the small, dark space, pulling the heavy wooden door shut just as another blast rocked the house, sending shards of glass flying. The door was locked, but the heat was already seeping in. Aisha looked at Leah's terrified, tear-streaked face. "We're safe, baby. Just for a minute. Mommy won't let go." Meanwhile, Elias was moving with an unnerving purpose through the smoke and confusion. He found two masked intruders near the kitchen, neutralizing them with quick, brutal efficiency, his face slick with sweat and soot. His only thought was Aisha and Leah. He saw the smoke billowing from the center hall, instantly realizing they had used an explosive to cut off the escape route. Elias ran toward the inferno. He hit the burning hallway, the intense heat scorching his skin. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the collar of his suit up over his nose and mouth, protecting his lungs, and plunged into the thick black smoke. The boss fights through a burning hallway to reach them. He heard Aisha's desperate, muffled coughing from behind the utility closet door. He smashed the handle with the heel of his boot, throwing the door open. Aisha and Leah stumbled out into his arms, covered in soot but alive. Elias grabbed them both, pulling them tight against him. "We have to go," he yelled over the sound of the flames, dragging them away from the fire. Suddenly, a massive figure, taller and heavier than the rest, slammed into Elias from behind. It was Victor, the leader of the Saintsford crew, masked and armed with a tactical axe. Elias shoved Aisha and Leah toward a side stairwell. "Go. Don't look back." Aisha, realizing he was about to face the true enemy in the chaos, didn't argue. She scrambled down the stairs, pulling Leah along. Elias turned, ready to fight Victor, but as he spun, he saw a horrifying sight in the dim light. Victor wasn't alone. Another masked man was climbing the stairs after Aisha, moving with unnatural silence. Elias let out a primal scream of rage and fear. He slammed his body into Victor, driving him backward, but his focus was torn. He had to save Aisha. He broke free, spinning around and sprinting down the stairs after them, leaving Victor momentarily stunned. He found Aisha halfway down the landing. She was there, but she was alone. "Leah. Where is Leah?" Elias shouted, grabbing Aisha, his eyes frantic. Aisha's eyes were wide with pure, debilitating terror. He took her. The one behind us. I was pushing her ahead and he grabbed her." Elias sprinted down the remaining stairs, hitting the floor just as the masked man vanished into the service tunnel access point, dragging a whimpering, struggling Leah into the dark. Elias didn't hesitate. He ran after them, plunging into the dark, cold tunnel, the smoke and heat of the burning mansion replaced by a choking chill. He ran until he burst out into the pre-dawn forest, but it was too late. He saw a vehicle speed away down the winding, gravel path. He stood there, roaring in agony and defeat, his fists clenched, covered in soot and blood. He had saved Aisha, but the enemy had taken his greatest love. Aisha finally caught up, collapsing onto the damp earth, watching the van disappear, her eyes dull with despair. Elias looked down at her, his face a mask of grief and fury. He had failed. Then from the darkness a figure emerged. It wasn't Ben or Marcus. It was Victor. He had somehow escaped the house and was standing there, a cruel, satisfied look on his face. "Don't worry, Thorne," Victor sneered, his voice triumphant. "The ex just wanted to meet his family. You should have stayed out of it." Victor turned and ran into the woods, leaving Elias and Aisha standing on the cold ground, watching the final vestige of their hope drive away. He finds the child unconscious, and the mother nowhere to be found. "Wait, I need to adjust the cliffhanger to fit the scene." Elias found Aisha, but Leah was taken. The shock of Leah's kidnapping left Aisha paralyzed on the cold forest ground, her world collapsing in silence. Elias, covered in soot and fury, helped her up. The fight wasn't over. It had just taken a devastating turn. They found Ben, having dealt with the service tunnel intrusion, and Marcus, who had secured the remaining perimeter. Ben, realizing his actions led directly to Leah's abduction, was a shell of a man, his face ravaged by guilt. Elias didn't waste time on punishment. Leah was the only priority. Victor and his crew are the distraction. Mark is the key, Elias graded out, his eyes burning with a desperate focus. "Ben, use your contacts. Find Mark. Marcus, you stay with Aisha." But before they could move, Aisha stopped them. "Mark didn't just take her to hurt me," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. "He wants me. He wants the evidence. He's going to wait for me." A chilling realization struck Elias. Mark had left Aisha behind deliberately, knowing she would sacrifice anything for Leah. He was using the child as bait to draw the mother out, believing she still had the critical microSD card. "We need a plan," Elias said, his mind racing. Aisha shook her head, her fear replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. "No. I need to go to him. Alone. He'll hurt Leah if I don't." Elias vehemently refused, but Aisha was already making calls, using a prearranged, secretive number she had set up months ago for emergencies. Within minutes she had secured a meeting with Mark. A derelict warehouse near the old docks, the perfect place for a final, terrifying confrontation. She agreed to bring the evidence, knowing Elias had already secured the real proof, but she kept the true location of the microSD card to herself. Elias had no choice but to follow. He gathered a small, tight team, Ben and Marcus, driven by guilt and fury, and prepared a silent, tactical assault. But Aisha went ahead, walking straight into the jaws of the trap, guided by the desperate love for her child. Aisha found Mark alone in the vast, cold warehouse, the air thick with dust and the smell of the nearby harbor. Leah was across the room, tied to a metal chair, mercifully unconscious but breathing. "Mark," Aisha whispered, her eyes fixed on her daughter. "Where is the evidence? Tell me what you want and let her go." Mark smiled, a cruel, familiar look that chilled her to the bone. He held up the empty silver necklace Ben had given him. "You lied, Aisha. Ben gave us the locket, but the card is gone. You're clever but not clever enough. That's why I need you to tell me where you hid the copies." "The card is gone," Aisha repeated, trying to sound truthful. "I destroyed it. It's over." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "It's never over, my dear. You thought you were running from a petty gang. You were running from the Vibora cartel." The name hit Aisha like a physical blow. Vibora, the Viper. A notorious, brutal international network known for trafficking and high-level corruption. He revealed the twist. He wasn't trying to flee from the Mafia. He was working for a cartel that wants the same incriminating evidence she carries. "The Saintsford crew are just puppets, Aisha," Mark sneered, tossing the necklace aside. "We needed that proof because it doesn't just sink them. It sinks the whole North American distribution line. The line that was set up by the man who recruited me, Elias Thorne's father." Aisha stared, her mind spinning, unable to process the enormity of the twist. "What? That's impossible." Mark walked closer, his voice laced with venomous satisfaction. He also hinted that the boss's late father was involved in the cartel, connecting their pasts in a way that flips everything on its head. "Not impossible," Mark hissed. "His name was Silas Thorne. A legend. He built this whole network 10 years ago before he supposedly retired. Victor works for the cartel, I work for Victor, and the cartel wants the evidence gone before Elias, the supposed protector, gets his hands on it and realizes what his own family was built on." Mark's words connected their histories, flipping Elias's entire mission on its head. He wasn't just fighting a trafficking ring. He was fighting the ghost of his own father's empire. The cartel wants the evidence to save their supply line, Mark continued, his voice dripping with triumph. Elias wants the evidence to destroy his competition. But if Elias sees the contents, he'll know the truth about his father, and the network will collapse from the inside. He grabbed Aisha's arm roughly. Where is the copy? Tell me and you might see the girl again. Aisha didn't flinch. I don't know, she lied, the truth a shield she couldn't afford to drop. Mark's eyes narrowed. Fine. We'll wait. He shoved her into a metal chair and lashed her wrists and ankles tight with heavy zip ties. A moment later, a masked figure entered the warehouse, carrying a small camera. Boss needs proof, the figure grunted, setting up the camera to face Aisha. Mark stepped into the frame, his face full of cold menace. He grabbed Aisha's hair, forcing her head back to look into the camera lens. This is for Elias, Mark said, his voice loud and clear, meant for an audience of one. The girl is fine. Send the evidence or this is your last chance. Aisha, seeing the camera, knew Elias was watching. This wasn't about the evidence anymore. It was about the man she had come to love. She had to warn him, but she couldn't speak. She looked straight into the lens, her eyes wide with terror, silently screaming his name. Mark stepped away and nodded to the masked figure. Finish it. The figure walked behind Aisha, out of the camera's view, and Aisha felt the cold steel of a knife pressed against her neck. She closed her eyes, letting out one final desperate scream, a raw sound of fear, defiance and love, that she prayed would reach him. The boss receives a video of her tied to a chair, screaming his name as someone moves behind her with a knife. The video feed was cut out. Back in his tactical van watching the feed, Elias Thorne felt the air go out of his lungs. He saw the panic in her eyes, heard her desperate scream, and knew the only reason Mark had cut the feed was to force him into action. Elias roared, his control shattering completely. He looked at Ben and Marcus, his eyes blazing with a dangerous, pure grief. They just sealed their fate, he growled, slamming his fist onto the console. We move. No. Burn that entire place to the ground if you have to. I want her back and I want that snake of a man dead. The knowledge of his father's potential involvement faded into the background. All that mattered was the woman he loved, the child who called him protector, and the fight he was about to unleash. Hope was gone, but the furious certainty of his mission remained. Elias Thorne didn't wait. The video of Aisha's terrified face and the cold steel of the knife was the final, devastating trigger. The knowledge that his father, Silas Thorne, might be tied to the brutal Vibora cartel that Mark served was a deep, burning wound. But rescuing Aisha and Leah was the only medicine that mattered. He gathered Ben and Marcus. Ben, driven by self-loathing and a desperate need for atonement, had already prepared the tactical schematics for the abandoned warehouse near the docks, the location Aisha had agreed to meet Mark at. Ben, you and Marcus secure the perimeter and watch the exits. No one, absolutely no one, gets out. If Victor shows his face, he belongs to you, Elias commanded, his voice raw but controlled. I go in alone. I want Mark and I want Leah. They moved under the cover of the late-night darkness, speeding toward the derelict docks that smelled of salt, rust and fear. Elias drove his armored car right through the main gates, smashing the flimsy barrier, announcing his arrival with a deafening crash. The boss storms the enemy compound with ferocity only fear can create. He didn't walk, he moved like a force of nature, a dark, unstoppable wave of vengeance. He plunged into the cavernous, cold warehouse, his eyes scanning for Aisha and Leah. Mark and the cartel soldiers were waiting. They knew Elias would come, but they hadn't expected the sheer, terrifying intensity of his assault. Elias immediately spotted Aisha. She was still tied to the metal chair near the center of the warehouse, her eyes wide with shock and relief. Leah was beside her, still unconscious but slumped safely in her chair. In the shadows, standing guard were 3 massive cartel soldiers. Men who looked like they were carved from concrete, armed with heavy weapons. And standing in front of them all, a sneering, triumphant smile on his face, was Mark. Took you long enough, Thorne, Mark spat, leveling a pistol at Elias. Come for the evidence or the woman who ruined me? Elias didn't answer. He launched himself into the fight, a blur of tailored suit and deadly precision. He moved straight toward the cartel soldiers, knowing he had to clear the path before he could reach Aisha. The fight was brutal. Elias faced the seasoned, relentless fighters tied to his own family's dark past. These men were well-trained, but they were not prepared for the pure, unadulterated fear fueling Elias. He fought with a terrifying primal rage. He used his immense size and strength, his movements economical and lethal. He deflected a blow from a soldier, then used the man's own momentum to slam him into a stack of oil drums, knocking him out instantly. A second soldier advanced, trying to draw a blade. Elias met him with a devastating strike to the jaw, followed by a quick, brutal kick that sent the man sprawling into the darkness. Mark watched, his confident smile faltering, realizing he had awakened a monster. She watches him fight his way to her. Aisha couldn't move, but she watched every second of the desperate battle unfolding around her. The man who had once been so emotionally distant, so cold, was risking everything. His freedom, his life, his empire, for her and her child. She saw the raw pain and struggle on his face, the sweat mixing with the soot from the fire, the determination in his eyes as he took a blow and barely registered it. This was not the calculation of a mob boss. This was the sacrifice of a man in love. In that terrifying moment, Aisha realized the truth. No one has ever risked their life for her like this. Not her own father, not Mark, and certainly not the police she had been afraid to trust. Elias, the man she had run to out of desperation, was now proving to be the only person on earth capable of running for her. As Elias dispatched the last cartel soldier with a swift, final move, he turned his attention to Mark. Mark, terrified, fired his pistol wildly. The shot went wide, hitting the metal structure above Elias. Elias charged, dodging the frantic, clumsy attack. He reached Mark, grabbed his gun hand and twisted sharply. That evening, as Aisha was tidying Elias's bedside table, a courier arrived at the main gate. Marcus brought the package directly to the recovery room, a simple, unmarked brown envelope addressed only to Elias. Elias opened it slowly, his gaze heavy with caution. Inside was a single old, faded photograph. It was a picture of a smiling young woman, stylishly dressed and standing beside a man whose face was hard and recognizable, the ruthless leader of the Vibora cartel. Elias stared at the woman. His heart stopped. The woman in the photo was the spitting image of Aisha. It was Aisha's late mother. The final weeks were a slow, necessary march toward normalcy. Elias was out of the hospital, recuperating at the secluded estate. The Saintsford crew was dismantled. Mark was in custody awaiting trial, and the insidious trafficking network was destroyed. Justice had prevailed, but now came the hardest part: figuring out life after the war. Aisha packed carefully. Leah was drawing in the sunroom, happily supervised by Ben, who was working hard to earn back his trust and was now dedicated to his new job as Leah's official knot-tying instructor. Aisha wasn't running anymore. She was leaving by choice, a choice born of love and responsibility. She believed that Elias Thorne, the man who had fought through fire and took a bullet for her, deserved a life free from the domestic complexities she and Leah represented. His empire was cleaner now, and he could return to his life of cold power and safety. She walked into the library where Elias was resting, a faint scar visible near his shoulder, a physical reminder of the debt she owed him. She carried a small backpack and the key to her old apartment. "I'm ready to go," she said quietly, her voice steady. Elias looked up from the papers he was reviewing. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple dark shirt, which made him look less like a boss and more like a wounded, formidable man. He saw the genuine sorrow in her eyes, but also the resolute pride of a woman making a tough decision. "The threat is gone, Aisha," he said, his voice deep and calm. "You don't have to run." "I know," she replied, walking closer, standing beside his chair. "But I have to rebuild. Start over, properly. And you, Elias, you deserve peace. You deserve to focus on the life you built, without the constant mess of my past or the danger it brings." She reached out, gently touching his shoulder, right above the faint scar. "You risked everything. I can't ask you to risk your life for us every day forever." She was preparing to leave to rebuild her life, believing the boss deserves freedom from danger. Elias reached up and captured her hand, holding it tight. He looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a raw, earnest emotion she had rarely seen. He stops her, not with a command, but a confession that he can't imagine a future without them. "You've got it wrong, Aisha," he murmured, his thumb stroking her palm. "You didn't bring mess or danger. You brought purpose. Before you, my life was cold. I built this empire, but I had nothing to protect and nothing to lose. I lived in constant distance. You and Leah, you showed me what I was fighting for. He held her gaze, his confession completely genuine. I don't want a future that is free from danger, if it means being free of you. I don't know how to run a life anymore where I don't check the windows for your safety, or listen for Leah's laugh. I can't imagine a future without you, he finished, the words soft but weighted with the gravity of his commitment. I am not letting you go. Aisha felt the weight of his confession settle in her heart. He wasn't demanding, he was pleading, offering her a protective warmth she had craved all her life. The safety of a normal, quiet life seemed so pale compared to the fierce, absolute devotion of this extraordinary man. She hesitates, torn between safety and the only man who ever protected her. Elias, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know. Before she could finish, the library door opened. Leah, having finished her drawing, walked over and immediately spotted the tension. She skipped past the discarded backpack and went straight to Elias's chair. She looked at him, then at her mother, then back at Elias, her small hand reaching out and grabbing his. Scar man, Leah asked, her voice clear and innocent, can we go home now? The question was simple, but it held all the answer they needed. Elias's face broke into a relieved, genuine smile. He looked up at Aisha, his eyes asking the question once more, letting Leah's choice speak for him. Aisha looked down at the two of them, the giant, dangerous man who was her protector, and the tiny child who was her whole world, united by the small, strong link of Leah's hand. The decision was no longer between safety and risk, but between loneliness and belonging. Tears of hope welled in her eyes. She knelt beside Elias's chair, resting her head on his shoulder. Yes, honey, Aisha whispered, her voice filled with a lifetime of relief and love. We can go home now. The battle was over, the past was confronted, and love, fierce and unexpected, had built a home in the heart of a fortress. And that's where we leave them. Aisha and Elias, choosing a life together, bound by love and protection. The future won't be easy, they're facing a powerful, complex life, but they are facing it together, a family built on courage and sacrifice. But wait. The story of the Thorne family legacy isn't quite finished. Elias had put the old, faded photograph of Aisha's mother with the cartel leader into a file for later investigation. Later that week, Ben, now fully back in Elias's good graces and deeply trusted again, returned with the full background check on Aisha's late mother. Inside the file, along with the detailed report, was a new envelope that Ben had missed during the initial chaos. It contained a single item, a worn, heavy silver locket, identical to the one Aisha had worn. Elias picked it up. This locket was older, engraved with 2 initials. He opened it carefully. Inside, instead of an SD card, was a tiny, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and read the script written in Spanish, a language he knew well. It was a single cryptic warning written decades ago by his own father. The viper is loose. Trust no one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Every moment, every surprise, every emotion woven through it. Talk to me in the comments. Tell me what shocked you, what confused you, or what you'd love to see next. I always read what you share. And don't forget to subscribe before you go so you never miss the next episode we experience together. Take care, rest well, and I'll see you in the next one.